Manji, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Oompher is all about inspiring people to achieve extraordinary things. So who and what during your life and career has inspired you?
That's a really good question. I think when I look at historical figures, Gandhi's always been an inspiration to me, which is ultimately, don't sit around and wait for the world to change. If you want to change it, you've got to change yourself, and you've actually got to make it happen. So I've always found his works inspiring. Looking for balance in life, trying to strip away the ego and achievement aspects, and actually sort of doing something that is personally fulfilling.
Yeah, and you're 14 years old when you got a holiday job in London at a bank. And did those bankers in the early days inspire you ultimately to get into banking yourself?
Not really. I mean, banking. The banking job I was doing there was in a normal bank. Okay. So cashiers and tellers receipts, and really I was just doing basic accounting jobs. I was very good with numbers and maths, so I was naturally quite good at those types of jobs. But there was nothing particularly exciting about it. I think I got lunch and vouchers for lunch, which was always quite fun back then. But it wasn't the sort of the investment banking that we see today. It was a completely different model. Banking in pre-1985, pre-deregulation, was actually quite a staid, boring profession. So there was nothing to indicate there that I might actually go on and do that as a career.
Okay, and what was it about the investment banking which attracted you in the first place?
Again, I think it was just a continuation of being good with numbers, being interested in investment and stock markets. And when I was at university in my first year, I was trading stocks back then. So I was into it, I enjoyed it, and I guess it was a natural progression.
Yeah, and what part of investment banking did you enjoy the most, from auditing to monitoring risk and managing positions to actually joining the trading floors and so on? What part did you enjoy the most?
Well, I mean, I see myself as a big picture thinker, so I like looking at big macro themes and making strategic decisions. So when you put on big trades based on, the research that you've done, the analysis you've done, and they come off, I mean, that's pretty exciting. So I think that's what drives you. It's ultimately about, if you're into puzzles and things like that, and I mean, these days when you look at programmers and applications and whatever, a lot of it's driven by, trying to work out what is the best way to do something, or, how can we improve things? And it's those same thought processes when you're investing and trading money. And obviously there's a bit of excitement. So there's that kind of gambling thing. So I must admit, I got completely into horse racing when I was at university. So it must be my kind of Irish heritage coming through there.
Yeah, so you do have to be able to have that sort of big picture thinking and look at the opportunities that are coming next and so on. Yeah,
and I think and the ability to think really quickly. I mean, people have said this about John Key, that he thinks quickly on his feet, makes very quick, good decisions. And I think if you have those skills, which is really just about your brain power, your processing speed, then you can work in markets because things are moving so quickly. Now, the markets have completely changed in the last 30 years, and we can talk about that. But I mean, that was certainly part of the drive.
And what are some of the key changes that, when you say they've completely changed, what are some of the key changes?
Well, it's moved completely to electronic trading.
Okay.
So, I mean, one of the best books you'll ever read about markets now is Michael Lewis's Flash Boys book, which is all about high-frequency trading.
Right.
Now, computers have completely replicated humans. So, to make decisions at speed was obviously what a human function in the last 20 years. So the quickest thinkers could see the information, process it quickly, and think, what does this mean for X, Y, or Z? And then they could buy or sell it, and that was the market moving. Then over time, the mainstream market would come onto those trends. Now the computers do it. So there's all these algorithms, there's all these black boxes, to the point at which people are competing to buy space on fiber, because the transmission signals are quicker on that particular fiber.
Right.
So the thing has got crazy, where you just have these bunch of super smart computer programmers writing more and more programs to try and intercept and do what humans would have done. Which is actually, somebody wants to buy something, okay, if I know that 1 millisecond before them, I can get ahead.
Yeah.
And then you keep slicing and slicing and slicing. So the whole thing potentially can go out of control, which it has done.
Yeah, and with this technology, I mean, what are some of the key skills, I guess, today that are needed but potentially different to back when you were in it as well? Yeah,
I think we probably lost a bit of the human intuition, which I think was the fun bit. I mean, when you see pictures, of people trading in the pits and all that stuff, and they still show that sometimes on TV, but that's not what the markets are like these days. it is all computer driven. So the types of people who are doing well in those markets now are computer programmers, the quantitative thinkers, and they've always been around, but they've always been superseded a little bit by the traders making the decisions. Now the traders are not making so many of those decisions. In the short term, they're still making the longer term decisions. So the ability to think strategically is still very important.
Okay, and having yourself graduated with an economics degree in 1987 from the University of Manchester, for people wanting to become a stockbroker or get into investment banking, do they need qualifications as such, or as the Wolf of Wall Street portrays, do you need half a brain, or how do you go about it?
I think that is the same question that you would ask about an entrepreneur. Should you go to university, or should you get on with it like you're doing? And there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, I think it depends on your personality. If you're somebody who's very quantitative, a good finance degree is going to be quite important. But if you're somebody who's got a bit of intuition, a bit of pizzazz, who can actually sort of look at something and see the bigger picture before anyone else, then that's still a skill that you can have. But it's quite difficult to get into jobs in investment banking without some of the basic qualifications. I'll give you an example. Years ago, probably now 20 years ago, I was interviewing this guy who was coming through one of the normal interview processes, and I was probably like the fifth interview he was having that day. He was an African guy, and he had been what was he doing? He was a kind of a geolocator for oil drills, oil wells. And so he'd go around the place and he'd be searching out places to drill for oil. And he had some great characteristics of taking risk, a kind of a nose, for the right deal, and wanted to get into trading. And I thought he's the sort of guy that you could take, and he would probably do quite a good job. But I said, look, there's no way, I told him, there's no way you're going to get through this interview process, because you're going to be interviewed by all these kind of sales guys and they're just going to look at you and think you don't have the qualifications. But actually, to be a trader, you don't need those. To be a sales guy or an analyst, yes, you do need those qualifications. Right. And one of the banks I worked at, we tried hiring chess grandmasters, bridge players, very successful gamblers as traders, because we thought, well, we looked around ourselves at the desks and we thought, what are the skills we all have? What are the things we like doing? The same thought processes. So we hired some of those guys, and some of them turned out really good. Some of them turned out really bad. We had one guy who was the world speed chess champion, like he'd beaten Gary Kasparov, and he was amazing. This guy, you watch him play blitz chess. Yeah. It was intense. Pieces would be flying around the board. But when we put him in front of a microphone, the speed of the market overwhelmed him completely. So you think, okay, the speed on a chessboard just wasn't the same, because also you've got, when you've got money at risk, the fear factor goes up. And when you're getting hammered second after second by people shouting at you and the market moving around, it takes a slightly different type of processing, whereas chess is often quite a learned function. So you've seen the same games, so you've got all these games memorized. If somebody moves here, you immediately know how to move against it. Yeah. Markets are not like that. There's just random stuff happening all the time.
Okay. So you've got to be able to, I guess,
you've got to be able to react. And sometimes you've got to be able to react in very different ways. Right. But it's still a useful skill to have. Yeah.
And you talk about being able to look at the situation and I guess see the bigger picture and foresee what's going to happen in some ways. What can people be doing to develop that skill? Is it something that you're born with, I guess, naturally, or is it something that you can develop? And if so, how would you go about that?
I think there is a bit of natural skill there. So you've got to be good with numbers. Yeah. And that doesn't mean you need to be brilliant at maths. You just have to be very skilled in numeracy. So, for example, if you're rubbish at trigonometry, well, who cares? Because that's not relevant. That'll be great for the computer programmer guys, probably. But it's just the ability to be good with numbers and to be able to think quickly on your feet. So, you can train yourself, doing number puzzles and all that kind of stuff. And I think in general, just reading about global strategy, that's quite useful. There's so many fantastic books out there. Reading Michael Lewis's books is all you need to read, because he, Liar's Poker, The Big Short, Boomerang, and Flash Boys. He's someone who's been in the markets for the last 30 years, is a brilliant journalist, and you pick up a lot from his stuff.
So for all the people out there who are wanting to become stockbrokers and their perception on it's based from what they see in the movies, from the Wolf of Wall Street and so on, what would you say to them? What is it really like?
It's not like that. It's not. But it depends where you work, you see. I mean, again, stockbroking has always been quite a staid business. And again, that is starting to become much more electronic. Currency trading has always been a lot more dynamic. Again, that is shifting much more to electronic platforms. And then there are more and more markets now. I mean, you can trade anything as a retail investor these days. So you've got lots of people all over the place here in New Zealand as well, sitting in front of screens all day, trading from home. So it's the market has completely opened up to people. So I guess the glamorous bit or pseudo-glamorous bit that you see in Wall Street, and even if you go back to the original Wall Street films, yeah, I mean, that's what trading floors were like. Not to the extreme there, maybe in the US and some of those kind of boiler room places. But I think that whole business is changing as it becomes more electronically based.
Technological.
Yeah, it becomes much more of a technology process. And probably a lot of that kind of, ducking and weaving stuff starts to drop out.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
which is fun because the human element, I think, is quite important in all this as well.
And how does networking fit into it? I mean, in terms of working through the ranks and so on, was that quite a big part for you, or do you have to be able to network?
Oh yeah, I think so, definitely. So getting an internship somewhere, getting a holiday job somewhere, getting a foot in the door, because people tend to like to hire people that they know or that they've seen in action or that they trust. I mean, when I was hired, I was working in capital markets, which was in derivatives, so swaps. And at the same time, I was, I'd say trading, I was kind of gambling with guys from all around the different trading desks. And after a while, they came up and they thought, you're so good at this stuff, do you want to come and actually work for us? I mean, that's how it was. So, yeah, knowing people is quite important, and networking and developing those relationships.
Yeah, and how does the Series 7 as such fit into it, or what's that all about?
Well, Series 7 is an examination, so it's very much like doing your law or accounting articles. So it's just a series of exams that you have to take so that you get the appropriate qualifications.
Yeah. Okay. And Raf, as someone who's worked overseas for lots of your professional career, it's a question we put to Chris Luxon, the CEO of Air New Zealand, and we said, what is it from your experience overseas that you believe Kiwis are potentially not as good at in comparison to the rest of the world in terms of business? What are we slow at or need to work at in terms of an international context?
I think probably the sales and marketing has always been a little bit of a problem, mainly because Kiwis are not that great at putting themselves forward. When you compare themselves to, say, Americans or Australians, it's like, hey, we're winners and our stuff is brilliant, whereas Kiwis more, oh look, we've got this great piece of technology, but it's very kind of understated. Yeah. And the fact is, it usually is very good. Yeah. So we've got a brilliant innovation system here. I think what I love about New Zealand is the space, so the space to create and try new stuff. And then it's actually the next stage is being able to take it overseas, which is where you're really going to scale something and make sure that you can sell it. And we're getting better and better at that all the time, and I think as we go forward, you look at the example of Xero and how that's kind of launched globally. And I think we'll start to see a lot more of our businesses following those different paths.
Okay.
So, I mean, if I give you an example, back in the 80s and 90s, Kiwi workers were in huge demand in the city. They staffed a lot of the back office and admin functions because they were considered to be such hard workers, really reliable and smart. And so, that was kind of the first wave, was the human capital, and there's loads of Kiwis working overseas now, and some in, very, very high-powered jobs. Now I think with our businesses, that will follow the same approach. So people will say, hey, people are developing amazing stuff out of New Zealand. We're starting to see it be successful. We're starting to see some of it scale up into billion-dollar businesses. And I think, that path now that it's starting to be, more well-trod, will start to open up for us. So, I mean, that's something that I think we can expand on. We just have to get better at saying, actually, we've got some pretty good stuff here.
Yeah.
But still be well managed.
Yeah. From having spent most of your professional career in fast-moving private enterprise, what's the key differences you notice now being in a council or, I guess, government sort of run organisations?
It couldn't be more of an opposite. And I think probably the biggest challenge for me being in council, that it has been a frustrating process. Okay. So when I sit down and look at some of the problems we've got, within an hour I'm thinking, okay, here's the solution, but it could take a year for that solution to actually come to fruition, because you have to go through so many different steps to
that must be frustrating.
Happen. It's incredibly frustrating. And I still kind of say to myself, oh, we will get there in the end, but you get involved in politics, and then there's the huge number of regulatory and bureaucratic hoops you have to go through, and it's actually a very expensive and inefficient process. So when I talk to people outside who are a lot more practical and pragmatic, they look in at council and think, well, surely you guys, you should be able to do this quicker and cheaper. And there's a huge amount of cost in our political system at the local level that we need to somehow remove.
Okay. So I've just got a few quick fire questions to finish now. In summary, what would you say it takes to be a stockbroker?
Well, I think you've got to have confidence. You've got to have confidence in your abilities. You've got to have a genuine interest in whatever particular field that is, whether it's stockbroking or trading or being an analyst or whatever, that your outcome is clear, and what you're trying to achieve is clear. But having confidence in your abilities, and being interested in it as well.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be doing it for the money. I'd be doing it because you find it actually appealing and of interest.
Yeah. So for people wanting to become stockbrokers, just following on from that, if you're going to sort of sum up the top 3 tips for getting into it, what would you say to them?
Okay, I would research the current market. I would research the current organisations and major players, and I would be writing to them and saying, what does it take? What sort of people do you hire?
Yeah.
So often people just send out their CVs and they might get a nice letter back or not get a letter back at all. But actually, if you turn that around, why don't you write to the organisations you're interested in and say, what would it take for me to be hired at your place? And turn the whole process around. Whereas at the moment, it's always like, well, I'd like a job at your place. And it's like, well, okay, why should I hire you?
Yeah.
So doing your research, reading about the markets you're interested in, and being well informed and well prepared. I mean, that's what's going to differentiate you from the next person. There's no point just turning up and saying, hey, I've got a degree in this and I got an excellence or first class or whatever. It's like, great, loads of people have got that. Why should I be hiring you? And so often the interview processes now, and they always have been, people ask weird questions. They're trying to find out something different about you. They've got the CV, they know you went to uni or whatever. Who are you? Why should we hire you? What are you going to bring to my business that's a little bit extra? So the more research you do, one, it prepares you better, but one also it shows that you're interested in that particular company. And hey, I've seen what you guys have done for the last 3 years and the deals you did here, there, and everywhere, and I'm really interested in that. Or, they might say, okay, so what stocks do you follow? And you may not do that. So you turn up for a job, you've applied for a job, you don't trade or you don't follow the stocks. Now, if you could turn up and say, well, there's this one stock I've been following, for the last 3 years that I really like it because X, Y, Z, and you throw out a few facts about it. They kind of think, oh, okay, so you're actually interested in this. You're not just applying for a job. You understand?
It's actually passion.
The key thing is, don't go through the motions. If you want something, show them why you want it.
Okay, brilliant. And in terms of the markets, where do you see the key opportunities or the biggest opportunities being today?
I think, the currency markets have always been the leaders in terms of technology and technological development. I think in the stock markets, we will start to see, I think, a close relationship between the shareholder and the company. At the moment, stockbrokers are standing in between those two, and pension funds and institutional investors. So basically, if you want to invest money in the stock market, usually you might put it into a fund, KiwiSafe or whatever. The next piece of technology, and I've looked at this myself, I just don't have time to do it, will be connecting people to those companies. That is the key piece of work that needs to be done. So what it means is you might have, let's say, 10 shares in Air New Zealand, and you have the ability to, vote at meetings yourself, and there's a much closer relationship, whereas at the moment everything has got these barriers in between. So in a way, a lot of knowledge is held here. That knowledge will start to break down, as it has done with currencies, for example, and we'll have a much more vibrant ecosystem of investing. So I think that will be quite interesting. And of course, the whole equity crowdfunding that is starting to come in as well. So those markets are really breaking up. So it's, there are tremendous opportunities for the next generation coming through to be driving some of these changes.
Brilliant. And just before we finish, we always ask, what would the 16-year-old boy you were think of who you've become today? Would you be proud of what you've achieved?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. So to finish, Raf, can you look down our camera here and tell us, what are your wise words for the people of New Zealand?
I think find your passion and follow it. Quite often in life, it's not till you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s that you sit back and ask the question, what's my purpose in life? Why am I doing this? Well, I would suggest to people, do that now before you start out and find out you're in the wrong job. Work out what you're interested in and then follow your dreams.
Cool. Raf Manji, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.